Today's episode is brought to you by WellPleasedAV. Importer Mark Sosa has hand-selected a remarkable collection of high-performance brands like Inuos, QLN, Marison, Qualiton, Gigawatt, and more. Each of these specialist manufacturers are driven by engineering products that communicate the lifeblood of music. Check out everything WellPleasedAV has to offer by visiting www.wellpleasedav.com. That's www.wellpleasedav.com. Today's episode is also brought to you by AXPONA 2022. America's largest high-fidelity audio show takes place April 22nd, 23rd, and the 24th at the Renaissance Schaumburg Hotel and Convention Center near Chicago, Illinois. Plan a trip to the Windy City this spring and sample over 150 listening rooms of high-end audio equipment and explore the latest in headphone hi-fi in AXPONA's Ear Gear Expo. Tickets are available now at AXPONA.com. That's www.AXPONA.com. Today's episode is also sponsored by SCHIIT Audio. SCHIIT Audio designs and builds audio components in California and Texas. Based in Valencia and Corpus Christi, their wide line of amps, DACs, and audio accessories fit any budget, starting at $49. For a full rundown of all their products, visit SCHIITdotCOM or stop by their retail store in Old Newhall, just north of Los Angeles. That's SCHIIT.com. You have reached the Occasional Podcast, Season 7, Episode 3. Our interview today is with Mark Schneider of Linear Tube Audio. That's LTA Audio for short. We dug deep into the archives for this one. I actually got a chance to sit down with Mark at a show quite some time ago. Upon reviewing the show myself, I think this is just a really interesting interview. Again, he has a unique perspective amongst all the other amplifier interviews that we've done over the seasons. It really seems like Mark was the enthusiast first, and he kind of took over some of the designs from David Berning. So he was already in retirement, kind of happy, kind of doing his own thing, and he really reached out and did something different. But he's grown that company into a thriving amplifier manufacturer. I've had a couple of their amplifiers in here for review, and they are outstanding. So we're very excited for you guys to hear his input, his design, thoughts, coming kind of from a really passionate guy who's passionate about the hobby and then came into it a little bit later in life. So it's a cool story. But first, we do have the AXPONA show launching this week, which is very exciting. And I wanted to give you guys a sense of what was coming at the show. We have a lot of new product releases. We have a lot of friends of the show that are going to be there, a lot of friends that have been on the show that are going to be attending, and a lot of new products to talk about. But first, I wanted to just address a couple of things that were not going to be at the show or weren't directly pushing stuff out for the show, but that came through the mailbox this week. So we're going to have all the news, all the product releases at one time. But first, this one landed in my inbox. I thought I would share with you. Sumiko and Project are announcing a new Phonobox DS3B, Phonobox S3B, and a mass-loaded X8 turntable this week, all from Project. The new turntable is $2,600. The catch is, the new twist is, I should say, that all these options, all these new products offer a balanced experience. So they offer balanced connections in between each other. The turntable can put out balanced connection. So the X8 ships with a semi-balanced connected E 5P RCA cable and the Sumiko Moonstone moving magnet cartridge. When you upgrade to the moving coil cartridge, it incorporates the fully balanced 5P XLR connecting cable, which is sold separately. And you can connect that to their balanced phono stage that we were talking about. There's a sense here that, unlike a lot of stuff, the connections fully through can be balanced. If you guys love balance, if you think there's merit for that, a very interesting proposal that's coming out from Sumiko and Project. Also worthy of note, SCHIIT Audio is bringing back their LISST MOSFET in a can. That's the list solid state tube replacement. Because as you know, we've talked about just the previous 2 episodes, that tube inventory is getting a little bit scarce. So Jason Stoddard, who really runs a lot of the design over there, he has said, hey, we're going to try these other tubes, and also we're going to go for a solid state tube replacement completely. So that will never wear out, or at least wear out a lot less quick than your typical tube would. So if things get very dire, you don't have to throw your amp away just yet. On the more expensive side of things, AudioQuest, Mythical Creatures, interconnects have come out. They have a carbon and graphene resistive mesh network. We've had a chance to hear some of these cables. I have listened to them in my system, and they are great cables. However, they are not for the faint of heart. They are very expensive. Thunderbird, Firebird, and Dragon, all different levels in this series with, and I have to mention this, the XLR Dragon being the pinnacle, the most expensive one, $11,900 for a single meter. So, nice and pricey. Meze Audio also just added an IEM to their lineup, ADVAR, ADVAR, I'm assuming that's how it's said. It has a 10.2 millimeter single dynamic driver, and that's going to retail for $700. Okay, that's all the kind of non-show news. That was general from the inbox. Now, to get to the good stuff, to get to the show stuff, to get to the very quickly coming out, I want to throw a special shout out for Damian Von Schweikert and Von Schweikert Audio, who were just on the show last week talking about their Ultra 7s and design philosophy. It was a great interview. We spoke for like roughly an hour and 45 minutes, and it went by just like flap of a wing. If you want to hear more from him and his high-end loudspeaker design kind of ideas, he talked about his philosophy. He talked about the way he angles his design goals. They'll probably be showing the new Ultra 7s, which are their new flagship, with a ceramic driver. Very interesting choice. He says they are material agnostic, so they try all kinds of stuff. Their room will be in the Euphoria, so you can swing by there. The subject of this review, linear tube audio, will be there in 606 and many other rooms, but in 606, they'll be showing with our good friend John DeVore Super 9s. That's his speaker, and DeVore was on an episode a couple seasons back, but it's been a very popular one. Very interesting guy, very artistic guy. He does some great stuff online in terms of art. Zesto Audio has a new Andros Tessera, Tessera, reference phono stage, 100-watt tube Class A, new Baya 200. That's pretty cool, 100-watt Class A. Select stereo power amp, the Leto Ultra 2 pre-amplifier, which was launched just in Q4 of 2019. They're in room 416. Also been on the show, reel-to-reel machines. United Home Audio, one of the few guys who is making new reel-to-reels aimed directly at audiophiles. His new UHA Super Deck, also not for the faint of heart, at 90K. You can hear that in Nirvana A. Music Direct and MoFi, big news. I can't tell you what yet. It's still under embargo, but all will be revealed in just a few short days. On that, they have multiple rooms, so make sure and check them out. Music Direct also sells records down in the marketplace area, but MoFi always has some stellar rooms, 3 to 4, strewn about the show, but they always an interesting listen. John Durda, who's been on the show a couple of times, he'll be there. We're going to connect with him and talk about some other new stuff that's coming out. So a lot of interesting stuff. Keep your ears tuned for that. Great friend of the show, QLN. They'll be showing off some speakers with a couple of other friends in 488. T plus A, they have interesting products coming out. The first time showings will be there. They're in 8120 and Ear Gear Expo. Vinny Rossi has been on the show. He'll be in 488. Really good high-end tube pre-solid state amplifiers. High-end, look fantastic, sound fantastic. The high kings of the low end, Submaker SVS in 702. Please don't forget they also make loudspeakers now. They make all kinds of surround sound, but they're usually one of the great guys who can make it out there with a surround sound system in a predominantly 2-channel show. And they sound awesome. Also worth checking out. Focal and Name will be there in Utopia B. All kinds of products there. Inuos. Arender has a new slew of music servers coming out. This one's very interesting. Sorry for my accidental chuckle there. Divulay. Makers of Bluetooth speakers, the highest end Bluetooth speakers you could ask for. They, of course, do other kinds of connections, but they definitely do Bluetooth. They have a $2,400 5.1 soundbar coming out. This French company has always pushed the envelope in terms of mainstream consumers and really high-end audiophiles, and they try to blend it into one, so that's always an interesting mix, and this is a soundbar. Typically shunned by a lot of audiophiles, but I'm sure if anybody can do it good, it's Divulay. Audaz will be there with the new flagship LCD5 planar magnetic headphone. If you haven't had a chance to hear that out, that's their newest in their flagship line. $4,500 flagship. Really nice sounding headphone. I literally did a review of it, and I think it's fantastic. And our good friends at Woo Audio have a quote-unquote budget electrostatic amp coming out called the ES8. It takes EL84s and 8532s. Has a July launch date. No price just yet, but it will be on the more budget side of things. Now, keep in mind, their top flight flagship electrostatic amplifier for headphones is $8K, so expect this to be a little bit less than that, but they will be showing in room 462. We will be there. We'll be doing some recording. We'll be doing some other fun stuff. And I'm very excited for the whole show. So that's AXPONA this weekend. That would be April 22 through 24. We'll have a post-show wrap-up as well. And, of course, our written coverage on both Part-Time Audiophile and audio-head.com. Good to see some friends that we haven't seen in a very long time. And we'll get a chance to hear most, or if not all, of these products. Now, as we say, on with the show, here we go. Mark Schneider of LTA Audio. Today's episode is brought to you by Musical Surroundings. For over 30 years, Musical Surroundings has distributed high-performance analog playback equipment to vinyl enthusiasts and music lovers throughout the United States. Based in Oakland, California, Musical Surroundings represents world-class brands like Clear Audio, Hanna, DS Audio, and their own line of Musical Surroundings phono preamplifiers. To learn more about the exceptional turntables, cartridges, and analog accessories they offer, visit musicalsurroundings.com. That's musicalsurroundings.com. Hey everybody, thanks for joining us today. A very special guest, Mark Schneider from LTA. I would like to ask you if you could give us a little bit of a background on your company and how it formed.
Okay, well, I live near a gentleman and know him called David Berning, and he is one of the best tube amplifier designers around, and he's been doing it for 45 years.
Where are you guys located?
Washington, D.C.
Oh, there you go. Washington, D.C.
And
a lot of good audio comes out of there, I think.
So I knew him, and I retired from my previous job as engineering director at a big company, and after a couple of years, it kind of seemed like I needed something to do. So I went over.
As it happens, yeah.
So I went over to David's house to try to get an amp from him, and he says, "Oh no, I'm not making that one anymore." And how about this one? No, I'm not making that anymore. And he's tending to just want to ride his bike. He doesn't have a car, and he bikes for 1,200 miles a month. And
a likely scenario from the men I know in retirement. It's good. It keeps you healthy. Just watch out for those cars. LA's not the place for it, I don't think.
But he loves to design. It just he doesn't like to build. The thing about it takes to build an amplifier, you put all these parts together, spend 3, 4, 5 days putting it together. Music comes out, and your reward is you get to start over and make another one. And so he's kind of done with that. So I asked him, do you want to go into business? He said, no. I said, how about licensing your technology? Okay. And he said, yes. So he had to also teach us how to build it, because his stuff, there's a tremendous amount of hand-wired, hand-wound type of things. And so he is very gracious, very nice guy, and he helped us train the people. And I got a bunch of 30-year-olds and taught them how to solder, and we have 9 employees now. And it just was me at first, but they're much better at doing it than I am. So anyway, that's how we started, and we were gonna.
How long ago was that?
And that was 5 years ago.
5 years, all right.
Maybe 6. And so we were going to use a different amplifier initially, and then he says, well, I got this thing called a microzodal, and I also got a stack of letters of like 20 guys that are begging me to build them, because he had come out with this, it's a 1-watt headphone amp that he had come out with in like 2000, and he made them for 3 or 4 years, and they sold for $750, and then he stopped making them, and on eBay you could buy them if you saw one for $1,200. But he had just a bunch of people that really wanted it. So he says, why don't you take this? So we went and we made some improvements to it, because he made it for the lowest cost possible, Chinese tube, switching power supply. So we redid all of that. But we didn't know anything about audio. We thought we did as a hobbyist. So we learned a lot from David, and have improved the product many times over the years.
So tell me a little bit, you had mentioned that some of your products use switching power supplies and some use linear power supplies. Can you just kind of go into that and what made you guys go that direction?
Yes, so a normal switching power supply, which is a pulse width modulation type, there's a couple different types, is used in wall warts and computer power supplies, and you can build the cheapest or least expensive power supply as a switching supply. You don't really need much of a transformer. And so there's lots and lots of them. So a linear power supply doesn't have any of the switching frequencies and the switching noise that comes along with that, and so it's much, much better for audio. And so then David, though, developed, he is by trade, or he was, when he worked for National Institute of Science and Technology for 30-something years, he was a switching power supply designer as well as a physicist. And so he developed a switching power supply using the different way to make one, and that way is much more suited to audio and actually better than any linear supply. But they're very difficult and expensive to make, and they have lots of wound parts. But David uses more or less the same design from our series of 40s and ultralinears all the way up to his $70,000 and $90,000 power amps that he still licenses to someone else. He still does design work. But anyway, he's developed and tweaked this technology over the last 15 plus years. So his supply is really the best type that you can get for audio. But the linear supply comes pretty close. And so he also knows many techniques, being in audio for 35 years, on how to build the best linear supply technologies or topologies. And so there's also companies like Bellison that makes super low noise regulators and polyorganic caps instead of aluminum, which have super low ESR. And so we utilize all these technologies into our supplies, so we make some very, very good supplies. So everyone thinks you have an audio circuit and the power supply is over to the side, and it just gives you the power. What we learned from David was all the audio goes to the power supply. It's like one big giant loop. And so the power supply is, if it's not very good, your amp's not going to be very good. So it becomes even more apparent when you have things like phono preamps and you're using with very low level signals, and the power supply quality could be 70% of the quality. So it's really, really important, the power supply.
Is there any type of quality you think that you could attach to a poor performing switching power supply? Like, oh, that's a power switching supply. It's got this particular thing I know is no bueno.
Well, you can often hear a little bit of high frequency noise or hiss in the background. That's the kind of the most awful with the cheapest. But if you use a really cheap one and you put it on your nice amp, you can hear all this hiss, because the pulse width modulation has a frequency, a switching frequency in it, and basically it's doing multiple things at a very high switching rate. So each of those, say it's a 5 volt and 24 volt, the 5 volt and 24 think they're getting the whole pulse of the driving clock, when in fact it's switching between all of them super quickly. So they all think they're getting the whole thing, but they're all getting a portion of it. But that noise, that frequency of the switching frequency, is the biggest problem with a switching power supply.
Kind of a basic idea, what are the benefits of a separate box for the power supply? Because on the Z10E, there's like a little, there's an umbilical
External,
cord,
yeah.
and then it comes out, and then there's a switch there. Why did you guys choose that design, and what are the benefits to that in terms of design in your mind?
Well, the transformers radiate magnetic energy, which shows up as hum. So we, our first product, the microzodal, you can turn it up it has an external supply, and you can turn it up all the way with headphones on to full volume, and you can't tell that it's turned on. So,
and that is quite the test, because that is very rare.
Yeah, and so
it's not that common.
So we're kind of stuck with that, because that's the level that we have to design the rest of our products, and that's what we try to achieve. So it depends on some of our products. We have the transformer in, and there's a teeny little hum, but you have to turn it all the way up to hear it. And so for in the listening level, if you will, there is no hum, so we let those go. But for the Z10E, it's a smaller case, it's a bigger transformer. There was no way to get the noise out without taking the transformer out of the box. And that's just the characteristic of transformers. Toroidal transformers have much less radiation pattern than your typical the square kind of ones you see on the top of tube amps. Those you even have to turn. One has to be typically 90 degrees away from the other one, and when they mount them, one has to be 90 degrees because they're radiation patterns. Otherwise, they add together. Actually, sometimes what we do with the toroids, they also have, it's not a completely circle. It's got a couple of nodes where it's louder. So when you put the toroid in, we actually turn it till it gets the lowest amount of hum.
Yeah, I was going to ask, that is, in terms of feature set, the toroid transformer tech, it is very common in audio equipment. Why is that particular technology the one that everybody kind of goes with in audio?
The pattern of the magnetic radiation is much lower around it. It tends to have one through the donut hole, if you will. And so you can put stuff next to it and it doesn't start humming. Whereas the older classic type square transformers, you can't put stuff very close to it because it might have a radiation pattern of an inch or 2 or 3. And so it's really about that.
Yeah. How is it that like tiny headphone amps and such get away with being so close to those electronics then, and then when you get bigger, you get these obviously bigger cases, but is it just that the hum is masked somehow, or how do you solve that in a small case?
Well, smaller transformers have less
hum.
radiation. And some components, you can put them right next to it and it doesn't matter. Some components you put them next to, or even once we were putting step-up transformers inside our integrated case, and we wondered why nobody puts step-up transformers inside their integrated for the phono preamp. And step-up transformers like a huge pickup, like the cartridge. And so we were 20 inches away, and there was no place diagonally, the farthest point, 23 inches away, we're still picking up some hum from the transformer. None of the rest of the stuff was picking up any hum, but those things are very sensitive.
And are there techniques that you can do that would like block or shield or? Yeah,
well, there's that type of radiation is magnetic. It goes right through metal. It goes right through everything, except mu metal. And mu metal is a specific type of alloy, and you see it inside of a lot of electronic components, like a little aluminum-looking box inside, but the metal's a little soft. But you can't just say, okay, I'm going to take a piece of mu metal and put it in between. The mu metal has to be engineered by someone that knows how to do it, and they can reduce the hum a lot with that. But even we had mu metal covers on the step-up transformers, and 23 inches away, it goes right through it. So magnetic hum, there's very little you can do. The best thing you can do is is distance. Distance works the best. So that's why external power supplies, that problem is gone.
Makes great sense. What other kind of design elements do you think are the largest hurdles for you in getting the most out of what you spend your money on in terms of design?
Which tube you use. The tubes are tremendous differences in quality and output. The price, though, doesn't necessarily indicate the quality. It's really the demand. It's very much demand. So, funny little story. When I met David, I saw his amp that was in Stereophile 5 years in a row as editor's choice. He used 33JN6s, which is a TV sweep tube, and used to cost $5. They're all gone now. But I said, who wants a TV sweep tube in their amp? So take that amp and design it to use EL34s, and that's what our Z40 is. Well, so you can buy a set of KT77s, so you can buy or Muller EL34s, but anyway, you're basically dealing with maybe $500, $400, or $500 to $1,200 for a tube set. Whereas if we used the TV sweep tubes, which we use in our ultralinear, and that's our most detailed amplifier, those tubes cost $5. So it's better for everybody because we don't have to charge more, and the replacement tubes obviously are a lot cheaper. So David specializes in understanding which tubes are good for audio, but nobody knows about them or nobody uses them for audio. The ones for audio are getting rarer and rarer, more expensive and more expensive. 5 or 10 years from now, probably all the new old stock tubes are going to be gone of the ones that everyone's using today.
Is there a particular reason in your mind why a company doesn't pick up that torch and just start making really good ones with new tech?
It's a very difficult thing. You had the best minds in America, Germany, Holland, Russia, Great Britain, working on tube design for many, many years, and they're dissimilar metals, and a lot of the metals and techniques you can't use anymore because they cause cancer or something like that. Everybody that knew how to do it died. The equipment, some of it was kept, some of it was thrown out, but pretty much everybody went to when the transistor came out about that 10 years, everyone says, oh, this is so much better. They never wear out. There's no heat. They're cheap. And so everyone said, forget tubes. And basically all the people that worked on them and all that, that was in the 60s. And then 80s and more in the 90s and more in 2000, more every year. Everyone's, tube is the best amplifier man's ever invented. Obviously, that's why everyone's making tube amps, and the tube amps are all coming back. But the people and the technology are mostly gone. So lots of people have tried. There's one guy that bought Western Electric. Western Electric said the 300B is supposedly the best mid-range tube there is ever made. And the story is Western Electric did 200 or 300 versions of that before they got it right. Very small differences. And this is in the 30s or 40s or something like that. So there's a gentleman that had bought the Western Electric tooling and machines, and he's been trying for more than 10 years to remake 300Bs because everyone wants 300Bs because there's lots of amps and I don't know what they cost anymore, maybe $2,000 a piece for a Western Electric, and you need two. So there are people trying to do that. There's some in Eastern Europe, some companies that have come out with pretty good ones. They're 70% as good as the Western Electrics, maybe. There are different variations. I'm not an expert on it. But I have friends at other companies they use, like Lampizator, they use the 300Bs. And they'll give you a whole story on, 6 different ones that people are making and what the good parts and bad parts are. But none of them are as good as the original Western Electric, so we really hope the guy that bought the tooling and equipment, they were at AXPONA last year and said they were going into production this last summer. And I don't know if they did, but we're really hoping they did.
I have been talking with a lot of people about tubes in this scenario, and they very often, exactly as you said, go back to the 300B. It's been quoted as being, very versatile in its use. Also for amplification properties, it's considered very sweet, and you can multi-use. I'm not saying it's easy to design around, but they seem to imply that somehow it can do a lot of different things in terms of different scenarios for amplification, right? So that's a very interesting story. But why did you guys decide you guys don't use 300Bs in your amplifiers? Why did you guys just because the design
they're not available. I mean, the Western Electrics are rarer and rarer, and that's why they're $2,000 a piece.
Oh, that is the one that's 2,000. You were saying?
Yeah, the original. And they're just disappearing. And they may have almost all disappeared at this point.
Well, I will say this: the 300B is quite common. I mean, not in the world, but at an audio show, you tend to see that bulbous guy on a lot of amplifiers.
Right, but look at who makes them.
Yeah,
and they're not Western Electric.
Yeah,
and I mean the Russian guys make one. There's lots of them, but they're just not the same quality.
Yeah,
and but it was the best. It's considered the best mid-range tube out there, but there are, I think, 6 watts in a Class A configuration. Some people parallel them and get 12 watts, but that's about as much as you're going to get out of them.
That's what, yeah, and that is, you can't just keep adding and adding and adding. There's a certain limit in terms of sound quality to how many you can run in parallel, how many you can run in a chain to keep the power up. So yeah, that's I find it very interesting. I also think it's a good looking tube.
It's beautiful.
It looks cool, and when it glows, turn off the lights, and you can warm yourself by the fire. What else kind of makes LTA company unique? What do you guys feel like you do special?
Well, we have, of course, the David Berning designs are some of the most realistic tube designs, and of course we get super flat frequency response from 8 to 60K, plus 0, minus 0.5 dB, and most people are plus and minus 3 dB. So it's really flat, really accurate, especially the bass, and most bass is not accurate so we've got really controlled bass, high accuracy, real 3D kind of imagery, because it fools your brain because it's more like the original performance. So we use different technologies, and the power supply technology is super important, and the Bellison regulators and stuff I talked about earlier, and then the parts you use in the audio circuitry is also very important. The capacitor technology, most capacitors have steel leads. You don't want to use those. Most resistors have steel leads or steel end caps, so you want to have just copper. And no steel anywhere, only aluminum, because especially around the transformer. Even if you buy a transformer, they all have clamps on them that are steel plates, so we just throw those out. The screw that holds it, we throw that out. We get brass, because brass or copper doesn't mess up the magnetic field, and steel does. So there's lots of design tricks, but the great thing is David's been doing it for 45 years, so he knows them all. It takes a long time. There's no real book you can read. I mean, there's lots of books that say lots of things, but and
this has been mentioned in other podcasts, there isn't even really a clear path. Like if you want to become a corporate business lawyer, there's a path carved for you to get to that point. If you want to be the world's best amplifier designer, there is no path. There's a little bit at the collegiate level, I'm told, and then a lot of networking between you and that final product. And I'm always shocked that there's not really much out there. It's guys like this, and an example that you've already brought up. Unfortunately, they're getting fewer and fewer that really understand and have mastered the art of tube technology. Now, I'm sure there's plenty of solid state stuff, but this art, just like the tube, is diminishing. I feel like it is disappearing very slowly, and who knows where we'll be. I never even really thought about this, but what happens in 50 years when the designers... I mean, it could be a lost art. I don't think so. Hopefully we keep it alive, but that would be crazy, wouldn't it?
No, there's a lot of what you say is true, but there's a lot of stuff written about how to design tube amps and tube amp examples, and many. And if you just build a bunch of tube amps, and then you start changing the parts and seeing how it sounds. That's where you learn. You learn a lot. So it's just how many years do you have to do that before you have something good? And so we were lucky enough to have a guy that already did it his whole life, and he could just tell us.
Do you think that maybe part of your motivation is to keep that thing alive? Because you could have done anything with your time. You didn't have to do this.
Well,
Did you choose this for a specific reason?
Yeah, because I enjoy music, and I enjoy making electronics for music and designing products.
What is it about designing electronics that is interesting to you? Because I don't think that'd be for everybody. You know, it's an interesting choice. What is it about doing it that is like the most exciting for you?
Well, you put all these parts together, and music comes out, and then there's the quality of the music. And you put different parts in, or change the parts, or it's
the tweaking. It's like seeing the mixing of the potion that just kind of.
It's just kind of like a chef that's making soup, right? You put in all the best ingredients, and you don't really know what it's going to turn out like, and then you taste it.
Yeah.
And then you put in some different ingredients, and you taste it again.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like that.
In your experimenting with that, where does the role of measurements fit into that recipe making?
Well, measurements are important because you have to have the basic measurements there of no distortion and what the power is, and a nice beautiful sine wave and a nice beautiful square wave. But that's not the whole story. The measurement can't tell you the quality that you're listening to. So it's really, you have to listen. That's the only way. That's the ultimate measurement, is your ears. Our ears are incredibly sophisticated instruments for detecting sound, and very subtle, lots of subtleties. And it's hard to build something that's that good. So in 50 years, we'll probably have we'll have oscilloscopes that can be like our ears.
When you design and you think about the sound that you're going for in your amplifiers, do you have like a target that you think the audiophiles were like, or is it just like, this is what I think sounds the best?
Well, that's a good question. So I'm, slightly over 60, and my ears aren't anywhere like they were. But I have the 9 people that work for me. I think 3 or 4 of them are musicians, some professionally at night, some once in a while. But they have very good ears.
There's a 4 to 5K notch from the cymbal crash. And
yeah, no, you can make all those jokes. It's okay. But unfortunately, it's true. But these guys, they're musicians. A lot of them, they're 30 years old, 35. They have great ears. They can tell, I can just say, hey, the bass sounds good. They say, well, the upper mid bass is this, and the mid bass is that, and lower bass is this. That's our initial audience of people that say whether it sounds better or not. And then, of course, our customers. So we try to make our customers very happy when they receive it and feel that they are getting the sound quality that they expected. But that's, of course, there's all kinds of variables outside your control. With that, people's houses are different, the rooms are different, the speakers are different, their perceptions are different, their desires of what they want to hear or what they think they want to hear is different. So that's why we have our 14-day return policy. But yeah, the young people have great ears, and they're from diverse backgrounds, and
So there is a kind of collective, a committee of sorts that help shape the sound as it goes, of trusted ears. And that group is roughly 9 people.
Yeah, and the way we do it is we built some special switching equipment so we could have 2 amplifiers or 3 amplifiers and say they're all the same, but there's one kind of capacitor in one and another kind of capacitor in another.
Very interesting.
And then you can switch during the song. Because your audio memory, everyone thinks it's great, but it's not that great. And the best way is if you can just switch within the song. And so that's a tool we use, and we put on 4, 5, 6 different things, different types of music. And then everyone says number 1, number 2, or number 3. We don't tell anybody what it is, and then that's how we do it.
That's very interesting, because I asked that to a lot of designers, and it is not always the same. Some people, honestly, it's like it's one person in some smaller companies, not the big ones. Even at companies like Focal that I've talked to, it is still, there's a committee, but there's a lead. There's one guy with he was accept the risk of being the final say. So I'd like to ask that question, and it is not, there isn't a distinct pattern as much as a lot of the other questions that I asked many people. There's a lot of consistency. That one, however, is really more the shape of the company. I find it very interesting. 9 sounds good. I mean, that all sounds good if you want to do it a certain way, but that's a very interesting process. Tube amplifiers, I think, it's not any secret that they're notoriously known for being, if they're not done properly, they can be a little flabby in the bass or woolly in the bass or less defined in the bass end. How do you guys think about that and address that issue in your amplifier design?
Okay, so all things are nonlinear as they approach a boundary condition. A boundary condition, and so if you look at 20 to 20,000 of audio frequency, that's the job to reproduce. 100 to 0 is a boundary condition. 50 to 0 is even a bigger one. And so all things become nonlinear, tubes, transistors. So the way that we've gotten around that is by using the carrier, and we actually do the amplification at 250 kilohertz. And so who knew, except David didn't even know. It's actually an accident how he discovered it, but that's not a boundary condition at all. So it thinks it's just super high notes. And so it's super flat. There's no boundary condition, there's no nonlinearity. And that's where we get the 8 hertz to 60K plus 0 dB minus 0.5. David's got other amps that go even lower than 8 hertz. He can approach 0 with his technology. And then we bring it back down to the 20 to 20,000, and it's perfectly amplified linear bass. And that's how it controls the bass.
Well, I have had the pleasure of listening to the Z10E in my home system, and it is a wonderful sounding amp. So I think you guys are onto something.
We try.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. Appreciate it.
All right, thanks.
The Occasional Podcast is a production of the Part-Time Audiophile Network, which includes PartTimeAudiophile.com, The Occasional Magazine, the PTA Newsletter, and AudioHead.com. You can stay in touch with us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. The Occasional Podcast is produced and hosted by Brian Hunter, executive produced by Scott Hall at PTA Productions. If you haven't already, please subscribe to The Occasional Podcast on iTunes, Google, Spotify, or wherever your favorite podcasts are downloaded.